impulse from him not to go down that line?
I think it's now time for a concerted international response. The United Nations Security Council, which has not met throughout the crisis that has been going on in the Middle East now for the last couple of months, now needs to meet, I believe, in emergency session. This is a threat to international peace and security, what is going on in Libya. I think the UN Human Rights Council, the Human Rights Commissioner came up with a strong statement about the illegal activity of the security forces in Libya. But I think we now need to go further, as I said. I think we need to draw a line in the sand to the regime, saying that, okay, if you're going to do this, there are going to be very serious consequences.
There is a possibility, I have to say, at this point, that Gaddafi is not even in the country. We're getting reports just coming in, can't confirm it, but according to Reuters news agency, William Hague, the British foreign minister, is saying that Gaddafi is on his way to Venezuela. Is it possible? He's left the country, left it all behind?
Well, he may well have done. And this is the thing about Gaddafi and Libya. It's a very unpredictable place. We also were hearing earlier, even from jihadist websites, speculation that Gaddafi may have fled and gone to Venezuela. Now, none of this is confirmed, but I think we may well see more bizarre twists and turns in the hours and maybe days ahead.
Is there a way through this? I mean, is dialogue possible? Who are the groups who would talk? How can this be brought to an end domestically?
Well, how can you dialogue when you're shooting at your own people? And how can you dialogue when you are using mercenaries and others in order to attack those? We're hearing that the army in places may well be entirely loyal to the regime. We're hearing about defections. So how can you dialogue in this particular context? How can you dialogue when you hear Saif al-Gaddafi giving the kind of tone and a lack of clarity in terms of the reforms that are being offered?
You know, what is astonishing when you see what's happening in Libya and you saw what happened in Egypt and Tunisia is that despite the bloodshed and despite the threat of a harsh crackdown from security forces, people are so angry that is secondary. Physical concern for themselves is secondary.
Absolutely right. We now have a pattern here whereby which people who have thrown off years and years of repression and fear no longer care, and in fact more violence breeds more will in order to be able to turn over the regime, and I believe that's where we're at in the Libyan case now.
I mean, we're talking about the international community's response. Do you think the Western governments now should be looking forward to a very, very different Middle East and North African region?
Yes, the region has changed, and regardless of whether we count how many presidents or rulers fall in the next few weeks, what is clear is that we now have a situation whereby which we are going through deep political and constitutional changes. The citizens of the region are now demanding a fundamentally different relationship with the state, a state which has usually been run by regimes which, as we can see, are rapidly losing legitimacy.
And it's not easy, is it? I mean, even if you get rid of the guy at the top, as they have done in Tunisia and they have done in Egypt, there are still a lot of infrastructure problems to get through to get that ideal of democracy that perhaps they were looking forward to.
Absolutely right. I mean, the transitions that we've seen in other cases, in the coloured revolutions in Eastern Europe and others, will take many years. There will be also great disappointments amongst the people in some of these places which are now, such as Egypt, which are now moving towards democracy. This is where the international community can also provide a very useful helping hand as support for these transitions, not necessarily to run them, but to support. And I think the statements we're hearing from the EU in that respect, in gearing up towards providing support, are welcome.
OK, Salman, thank you very much indeed for that. For the moment, Salman Sheikh with me in the studio. So just to update you, we are getting reports that a huge march is taking place in Tripoli and that security forces have launched an operation against them. Witnesses are saying that live ammunition has been used, and one more very disturbing line coming out that military aircraft are being used to fire on crowds. And witnesses have said all along that we've been speaking to that these crowds are unarmed protesters. So we're trying to get confirmation of that and, of course, trying to get pictures of that. Let me just ask one more question to my guest, Salman Sheikh. Military aircraft being used against protesters? I mean, we've heard about aircraft-mounted guns being used against protesters, heavy machinery, and these protesters, by and large, are unarmed.
They are, and this is, of course, also a problem with the lack of information that we have. We don't have independent journalists and others verifying this, but the fact that we're hearing this is alarming, and it shows the extent to which the regime will go in order to intimidate and, if necessary, kill its own people.
What is at the heart of the disturbances here? I mean, we've talked a lot about oil and oil wealth distribution. Is that one of the keys, that oil wealth has not been distributed fairly?
That's right. There's been massive mismanagement, I think, in the 80s and 90s when the oil revenues were flowing, and this has not trickled down into the vast majority of the people in the provinces. Instead, a lot of that oil revenue has been used to buy off certain constituencies. The tribal system has been used quite effectively in order to carry favor for elements of the regime and for Gaddafi himself. What we've not seen is the concerted investment and investment in future generations, which we should be seeing in a country as wealthy as Libya.
Does that oil factor perhaps impact on other countries' responses to what's happening in Libya? Is there a fear there of disrupting oil supply?
I think it's part of it. I think what we can say for sure is that there is a struggle going on between those who have established relations with Libya, between their interests and their values. And in the case of Libya, with its vast oil reserves, largest oil reserves in Africa, these are questions which they've had to address in more compromised ways rather than in more principled ways.
OK, Salma, for the moment, thanks very much indeed for that. So just to recap on one earlier line, reports coming from Reuters news agency that Muammar Gaddafi may not even be in Libya. He's been reported as being on his way to Venezuela. Let's see if we can shed a bit more light on that and speak to Rory Challens, who's been spending the day outside the British Foreign Embassy in London. Rory, my information is that this line has come from William Hague. What are you hearing?
Yes, that's correct. William Hague, the UK Foreign Minister, says that he has seen some sort of information which seems to imply that Muammar Gaddafi isn't actually in Libya anymore. He's actually on his way, or has arrived, at least in Venezuela, which is a dramatic turnaround for Libya and what might be happening there. It also raises, obviously, several questions. Is he just the only one who's left? What has happened to his son, who was talking so strongly about the government's response to the protesters only 24 hours ago or so? And also, what happens next? What happens when he gets there? Will Venezuela welcome him? What would the new government in Libya do if this were the case? Would they try to set up some sort of extradition process? So, yeah, it's dramatic news and would really change the situation in Libya completely.
Yeah, it's fascinating, isn't it, how this might impact on what's happening in Libya. We do know that Britain has taken one of the strongest lines yet against Gaddafi and his regime's crackdown on protesters.
Well, William Hague earlier was using words like deplorable.